What did yesterday tell you about the state of U.S.-China relations post-Trump administration?
Well, I think what they told me is probably what they told pretty much everybody, both in the United States and in China in particular, which is that strategic rivalry is not a very pretty picture, and it entails and can entail people saying things in public which are calculated to offend the other side. So obviously, when we listen to the kind of the words that were exchanged, I mean, the Chinese obviously railed and put their hackles up as soon as the Americans were talking about Xinjiang province and Hong Kong and Taiwan. And similarly, the sort of the tirade which Yang Jiechi, could have let loose. I mean, they were only supposed to talk for 2 minutes. He spoke for about 15 minutes in a sort of a diatribe and a lecture to basically put the US side back in its box. Now, this is not very helpful. Hopefully, in private, they will be a little bit more courteous to one another and have some substance to talk about. But I think this was largely for their own domestic audiences, I think.
George, good afternoon, it's Guy. Do you think the Biden doctrine is fully formed yet in terms of China?
No, I don't think it is, actually. And in a way, I mean, you can understand why it was certainly premature for a meeting of President Biden and Xi Jinping. I mean, that was sort of mooted. Supposedly, it was something which the Chinese want to talk about setting up a meeting. I mean, I don't think that looks likely to happen any time in the near future. Yeah, I mean, I think that sorry, your question was really, remind me just again, I just lost the train of thought.
I just want to know where policy, in terms of figuring out how it wants to approach China. Yesterday we got a lot of sound and fury. What I want to know is how clearly thought out is policy at this stage?
Right. So the point I was going to go on to make was that in a way this meeting seems to be a bit premature. In the sense that I don't think the Biden administration actually has properly thought out the full kind of strategic implications of the very, very many bits of this jigsaw which it has to try to piece together, which is the bits about collaborating where they can and drawing red lines where they must and all that kind of stuff. But I suppose we're now kind of talking with the benefit of hindsight. I mean, it was at least the initial kind of verbal jousting was perhaps worse than we should have expected, but not entirely surprising.
Maybe not surprising, this jousting, but all jousting aside, are there areas where the U.S. and China might actually be able to find some alignment here, and what are they?
Well, I think there are a lot of areas. I mean, there are sort of public goods areas, right? Like, so if we're thinking about, public health, how to, run a more effective and stronger World Health Organization post-pandemic, peacekeeping, governance of international institutions, climate change, for heaven's sakes, which is going to be such a big issue during 2021 and beyond, but certainly in the run-up to the so-called Leaders Summit in April and COP26 at the end of the year. So these are all areas where, the two major powers in the world can engage in dialogue. There are also economic areas where they can engage. I mean, not everything is a matter of national security, even though the intersect between economic security and national security is something which both sides, in fact, we all feel very much more sensitive about nowadays. But it's not to the exclusion of all forms of commercial engagement.
Right.
The question is, how they actually, they could do that if there's a good will there. Yeah.
George, if you are sitting in Berlin watching what just happened, what do you make of it? Europe seems to be trying to sit in the middle. That wasn't something I thought you could sit in the middle of. What does Europe do?
It's a bit of a curveball question because obviously the EU's position on a lot of sensitive issues between the United States and China has been a little bit equivocal, right? So there was the whole kind of malarkey about signing this comprehensive agreement on investment, which the EU announced towards the end of last year, and which I think most people thought, certainly in the United States, as far as I understand it, that it was premature and there was no urgency for it. But Angela Merkel wanted to kind of get it through, and she did. And so, it's commonly said that, the Europeans, particularly the Germans, are, much more interested in commerce and trade than they are in human rights, to put it bluntly. I don't think that's, strictly speaking, as black and white as it sounds. And certainly the Europeans have come out with sort of statements about human rights and about China's behavior, which certainly would align very well with the United States position. So to answer your question directly, I mean, after this, initial jousting, as we've described it, I mean, I would have thought that the position in Berlin and other European capitals is to rally round the United States a little bit. I mean, I think the Chinese position, hostile as it was and kind of petulant as it certainly was, I think if anything, it might backfire, really.